Okay, hi everybody. I am going to be giving you a short lecture, maybe in several sections, um, on the charcoal trade in Somalia. So we're going to be looking at the illegal charcoal trade in Somalia, and the reading for this material is chapter 5 of your book, Environmental Politics in the Middle East, and it goes into a lot of detail of, the myriad ways in which the charcoal trade has an impact on the environment and the political implications for that as well. So we are going to spend some time talking about all of those. There's one video that's embedded into this, so at that point, pause the video and navigate to the link to have a quick look at that. But all right, so let's begin. Why is it working? Okay, hopefully this is going to work just fine. All right, so before we go into talking about charcoal in terms of the illegal aspects of it, I thought we would spend a little bit of time talking about what charcoal is. So if for those of you who aren't familiar with charcoal, it's basically the process of burning wood in the absence of oxygen. So in the top right picture, you can see they're stacking up the wood there that's going to get ready to burn. And then typically the way it's sort of burned in the absence of oxygen is that they mound lots of dirt around the burning fire, reduce the amount of oxygen that's getting to the coal. So it's almost like an incomplete combustion, if you will, of the wood. So they let it sit like that and smolder for hours, sometimes days, and then they remove the dirt, and then you can see in the bottom picture what you're left with. So it's partially combusted wood, but what it allows for when you reignite it is it gives a much hotter burn, and the quality of the heat is better, so you don't have as much smoke as you would if you just were burning fresh cut wood, for example. In sort of countries that we're discussing, the techniques aren't particularly modern, but in modern day charcoal production, it's much more sophisticated and the technology is better. A lot of times the wood is dried in kilns and then, very specifically burned to certain temperatures. But in this sort of environment, it's just sort of chucked on the ground and heaped with dirt and then allowed to smolder. So in Somalia, the charcoal trade is really serious. A lot of people take part in it, whether it's for illegal trade or sustainable attempts are made. But between 2011 and 2017, about 8.2 million trees were felled for the charcoal industry. And before that, there was a 1996 report that came out, a UN research report, that suggested that about 4.8 million sacks of charcoal were being produced annually, which would account for about 2 million trees per year that were being cut down. So such a huge volume of trees are being cut down, and they're using fresh trees, not dead trees, which traditionally charcoal production was done using only the dead trees. They weren't making charcoal with fresh trees. So obviously that is not a sustainable practice. And given that it fetches such a high price, more and more trees are being taken from the forests to be used in this manner. So, if we're talking about 2 million trees that are being felled every year, that's about $120 million worth of income per year, according to this UN report. So, of course, there's much conflict, as you probably read about in that chapter. So the protracted conflict, weak law and order, these vague rules over resource ownership, whose land is really being able to be used. All of these factors play into the sort of lack of alternative sources of energy and ways to make a living. So because people are trying to make a living, obviously, they're using resources like this because it fetches such a high price. So over the last few decades, we've seen an increase in unsustainable charcoal production. And consequently, the trade in charcoal has accelerated the threats of environmental degradation and also conflict over the control of whose land is being used for felling these trees. So it's become a really serious problem in Somalia, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the environmental impacts later on. But if we were to look at the uses, it's by and large used in cooking. So about 80% of the sub-Saharan African countries, they use charcoal as their main fuel for cooking and for heating. You know, that it's cheap to buy and it's easy to store, and it provides a very hot burn. So a lot of people are still cooking in this manner, in this very traditional way. They don't have access to any alternative fuel in their dwellings. So not surprisingly, the demand for charcoal increases. And another major use, which is accounted for in terms of charcoal, is in the Gulf states. The very popular shisha bars. Move my image out of the way here. Oops, what have I just done? I don't know if you can still see me, but anyway, so in the Gulf states, there's a practice called shisha, which I think over here you guys call hookah. It's a water pipe, and you use charcoal that sits on top of flavored tobacco, and you smoke the flavored tobacco through the water pipe, and it's a huge market, and a lot of the charcoal that's coming from Somalia is being used in these nice cafes and shisha bars in the UAE and Dubai in particular. So if we go to who's buying, the key buyers are the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Oman. And, you know, one of the main reasons is that they're not using it for cooking. They've got quite good infrastructure. These countries are using it for recreational use, essentially. And very conveniently, Dubai banned logging of their acacia trees to produce charcoal in 1990. So their domestic supply for charcoal dropped, which led to an increased demand in charcoal from Somalia. So it's kind of ironic that, you know, one Middle Eastern country recognizes how unsustainable it is, but is supporting the charcoal trade in another country and the very serious impact that they're having on that country. So the trade is still continuing, even though there was a 2012 UN Security Council ban on importing Somalia's charcoal. The practice still continues. So the market value of the exported commodity was estimated to be more than $250 million over the 2 years following the ban. So demand even increased further once the once the ban was put in place. So if we look to the environmental impacts, they are pretty broad and pretty dramatic. In your book on page 129, the author speaks about the destruction the trade has on local Somalis. So for instance, in 2011, the Horn of Africa faced one of the worst droughts in 60 years, which killed close to 250,000 people. And people were forced out of their countries. They fled and went elsewhere to neighboring countries. And the estimates were close to almost 10 million people were affected by this drought in 2011. And of course, drought, there's a relationship between deforestation and drought. we know very well that if you have trees on the landscape, they allow to hold water in the ground. They have a positive energy in terms of a positive flow of water, if you will. So once the water gets into the ground, it's able to stay in the groundwater level because of that positive pressure from transpiration. So removing the trees, not only does it prevent the rainwater to percolate more slowly into the groundwater, it denudes the landscape and then changes the local weather, right? So we all know that trees have a cooling impact, which has an impact on local climate. So removing those trees, especially in a desert climate, has a really significant impact on local weather patterns. So drought has become a very serious issue for Somalia. They normally have monsoon seasons, which are about April to June or July, and those weather patterns are shifting as well, which also ties back into the ITCZ. If you remember, we were talking about that band of clouds, the air currents that move north and south, and that impacts monsoon climate. So the area is being impacted from not only climate change, but their local environment because of deforestation. So there's also flash flooding that is occurring. Of course, we're talking about runoff, right? So during their monsoon season, the trees, which was quite extensive in Somalia, would have protected the ground, would have held the soil in place, and reduced the flash flooding incidences. But now, as soon as it rains, there's a gush of water that goes over a very parched landscape and just erodes through the landscape and takes with it lots of soil. So soil erosion is becoming a big problem too, which is also impacting the agricultural landscape for local pastoralists. So there's crop failures that are occurring because the land just isn't supporting the agricultural crops that used to be grown there. So on all accounts, it's a very complicated situation from an environmental standpoint, but also from a political standpoint as well. So this is a quick, it's a very short video clip. It's about 2 or 3 minutes long. So I suggest pausing, or actually I'm going to end the recording for this one and then pick it up after this. So head to the link. This is the only link that I'm going to have in the course description, and then watch this short video, and then we'll come back to part 2 to discuss more of this.